Okay, so this is the Scalability weekly call for the 2nd of March. The first item we had on the agenda was to talk about the future goals document that Andrew's put together. But Marin and Andrew are the two people who've mostly been working on that, and they're both. Oh, here is Andrew. They both weren't available at the start of this call. Oswaldo, do you want to take your thing first, and then we'll go back to that?
Yeah, sure. So I just added this point. We've been discussing on the epic for some time, me and Sean, and it's basically a discussion about we are moving towards using the sidekick cluster by default instead sidekick and sidekick cluster. So one thing that I noted when investigating is that sidekick cluster doesn't read the sidekick queues file to consider using the weights. So basically the priorities, which means that all queues will take like one priority, meaning that they are all flat. So I started thinking if that wouldn't be a problem for people that today uses sidekick and have their weights being considered for each queue, and we switch to using sidekick cluster with a flat priority list for the queues. Like imagine that there's a instance that uses one single queue for like a lot of the throughputs on this queue is like very high, and then we switch to one priority for everything. Then this specific queue start like getting too many queued uh, stuff like work to do. Just thinking out loud, that would be one problem. So
Can
I
I
just
can I just ask a question? Like when you are talking about these weights, do you mean the weights that are considered in all queues that come from the attributes we define on workers, or is this
exactly.
something that administrators adjust for themselves?
No, this is the ones that we define on the today we define on the worker attributes, and we generate the file. Then we read this file afterwards when we start the normal sidekick process. So just thinking that sidekick cluster doesn't consider these priorities, and we are going to start using these by default. So imagine that might be a problem in a few cases.
Why does Sidekick cluster not? Because I thought that Sidekick picked up those weights on its own. I thought that is it not in, because it used to be that Sidekick the Sidekick don't read Sidekick queues or all queues.yml or whatever it is.
From what I saw, maybe Sean can correct me. I
Yeah,
think that
we've got the weights in a file that isn't read by default by Sidekick, and it's never been read in Sidekick cluster as far as I can tell. I'm also I'm just trying to check this, but so I put my gut feeling in the doc, which is that if you are relying on the weights to get the higher priority queues processed on your self-managed instance, your throughput might be too low anyway, because that suggests that there's so much queued at any one point that Sidekick needs to make those decisions. In which case, you're in a pickle, I guess. Yeah.
I agree with your point, like partially, because it feels like a bold assumption that the throughput is like not that big for self-hosted using only.
So I was just thinking this through a little bit. Obviously, there's a lot of enterprise, GitLab enterprise or EE customers who are using, is in enterprise, is Sidekick cluster the default, or is it something you still have to configure? Does anyone know that?
No, it's never the default.
It's never the default. Okay.
That's until now when we
you're planning to move. So normally the usage is just let's configure a few extra processes with Sidekick cluster and have Sidekick by default enabled with everything, all queues. So basically, the idea is like configuring the process, actual processes with Sidekick cluster, but using Sidekick by default. That's the approach that we have today, which is different from GitLab.com that I believe we are using Sidekick cluster by default, right? We have different configurations for each node, and it's different from self-hosted.
So how do you pass those, like with normal Sidekick, how do those weights get configured in the Sidekick process?
In the Sidekick,
so sorry, do you mean if we have weights defined or if we don't have weights defined?
No, like the ones that, you know, sorry, Ellie, I'm just on a call, please. No.
I think Andrew wants to know how they currently get into the Sidekick process. If the Sidekick process wasn't spun up by Sidekick cluster, how does it know the weight? Do we pass that as a command line argument, or does it read the file?
if we spin up Sidekick cluster, we just start a bunch of Sidekick processes that don't load this file. If we spin up Sidekick through Omnibus, at least, we spin up a Sidekick process that does load this file. That's the difference. And the reason we can't load that file in Sidekick cluster is because it also defines the queues that need to be processed, which is obviously against what we're trying to do with Sidekick cluster. But you can apply weights on the command line, which we don't do.
And what is it? Q weight, Q weight, Q weight, Sean?
Yeah, something like that. I'm actually having a hard time finding the code that deals with this. I found a commit that said remove weights, but then in the changelog it says re-implement weights. So
yeah, that page, remember this, that I can link in a few seconds, minutes.
Because presumably if it is something you can pass in on the command line, like as a weight colon, sorry, Q colon weight, it wouldn't be very hard for us to adapt what we've got to support that, right?
No, but we need to consider whether we want to. So
yeah,
I think the way the weights work is that what I understand is basically they add something to the list. So say you have a queue with a weight of 2 and a queue with a weight of 1. The queue with a weight of 2 appears twice in the list. The queue with a weight of 1 appears once in the list. And then we just pick a random entry from that list to like get some work.
The way I read it is, it's kind of like this, the probability of a job getting picked from a 2 queue is like twice as much as a 1, and you know, it's like a weighted average, was my understanding.
Yeah, so right now, let me just do some calculations real quick. Right now, I think we've got so many queues that these weights are probably minimally effective anyway, because
it's true.
You know, if you've got, because the
Yeah,
highest weight we use is 5. Yeah.
That's true.
Let me just check this. Config, what's it called? Sidekick queues.yaml.
And the highest weight we configure is 3, I think.
No, it's 5.
4, 5. Yeah.
It's like post receive is 5. It's like it says in the file, only go to 4, and then one of them's 5.
Yeah. It's like the Spinal Tap thing. So the total weight we have is 169, which means that the chance of a weight 5 queue being picked is around about 3%, and the chance of a weight 1 queue, which is the default, being picked is around about 0.5%. So it's still, you know, I guess it's still, as a ratio, it's still a difference, but like, I don't know if it's
not exactly gonna, the thing that I'm kind of struggling with is, if we change this, how on earth do we prove that it's fine? Because, you know, we don't use it. It's not something that we can use GitLab.com as like a proof, unless we just go across to 1 queue for a day.
We do use it in some instances.
Like, no, but I think you'll find, and this is just totally, that a lot of the queues that are on the same priority clusters have got the same weights, right? So because we have the priority clusters, it's kind of,
Yeah,
it's kind of normalizing it a lot. And so it's probably not exact, but like generally speaking, that's the case.
So as far as I'm aware, on GitLab.com, we don't use weights at all because we always use Sidekick cluster, and Sidekick cluster doesn't load the weights.
Yeah.
yeah.
But
We have
On
different-
dev.gitlab.org and ops.gitlab.net, maybe we do, but they're
There's
probably
so
not
little
high.
traffic that the queues
Yeah.
would never be saturated
Yeah.
anyway. So
One thing as well, there's already sort of been discussing in the Epic is like QA tests. So they don't really tell us a lot, but they do tell us if something's drastically broken. So like if they're expecting like a merge request to be merged within like however long, and this change stops it from being merged that quickly because merged was a high weight queue and now it's not, that would tell us that. But like you said, it's not really a strong proof. The
What about
only
dev
proof,
GitLab org?
it's just not enough traffic. The only proof I can think of that would be useful is to somehow have a hidden because like we could add the option to Sidekick cluster to add the weights. It's just kind of a faff that we don't really need. We could add that as like a backwards compatibility thing. So we could say to like the self-managed support team, look, we've done this. We believe that this shouldn't really make a difference. Like, but
and
if you've got a customer who really, really needs it, they can enable this option and we will come back.
Maybe
and
we
review.
just add it as deprecated with a lifetime on it.
Yeah, we definitely wouldn't want to keep that around for long. The only problem is it's quite a lot of, let's say it's quite a lot of, it's more implementation that we're doing just for the backward compatibility case, but because we can't prove it any other way, I guess that's probably what we need to do.
Do we know like big customers, like,
actually,
you know, that, do we know if they're sort of segregating their Sidekick fleets? As far as I know, like, I've never been on a call where people are doing that.
No, I don't know either. I did have a comment
mush.
on a Sidekick cluster related issue from somebody over the weekend who was like, hey, I would like to use this in self-managed, but the problem with Sidekick cluster as you configure it in GitLab.rb now is you can't set different concurrencies for different queue groups, which is a valid request, but one that we don't need because we have the same queue groups always on the same nodes. So like, you know, the concurrency should always be the same because it's the same queue groups, but they wanted to have different processes on the same node with different concurrencies. So that seems like there might be some gaps here that we need to address anyway, like we as GitLab need to address anyway. The other option for backwards compatibility might be slightly simpler, Oswaldo, is instead of, so we backport Sidekick cluster to core. So Sidekick cluster is available in core. We use Sidekick cluster by default, but we just add a switch in GitLab.rb that says don't use Sidekick cluster. The problem then is like, we do need to get to a point where we're using Sidekick cluster, even if we're using queue weights, but it does defer the work of putting queue weights into Sidekick cluster because we don't think we'll need it until later. So that might be another option.
Because then we can sort of, if we can speak to the support people, and if they're saying, look, this is a real problem, like, you know, then it gives us an idea, but it also kind of manages the risk.
Yeah, and yeah, I think either way we need an option to go between the two while we're in this transition period anyway. So maybe just the simpler option is to just not use Sidekick cluster at all.
I mean, the other thing that's kind of interesting is, I wonder what the default concurrency on Sidekick is at the moment. It's probably something like 50. It's probably terrible performance.
Let me look this up. I was talking to Oswaldo about this.
So Sean, just to make sure I understood, we would default to using Sidekick cluster everywhere, and we would tell people if you set this setting in Omnibus, you won't be using cluster, and the queue weights will still have effect.
Yes. So the current idea is that Sidekick cluster will be used by default, even if you just set enable Sidekick and not set enable Sidekick cluster, because you can, in theory, the only thing that you can't set with Sidekick cluster that you can with Sidekick is, well, there might be other things, but the only thing that we're talking about here is the weights, and you can't even set that as a administrator. We set that as GitLab engineers, which is probably another reason why, even if the weights are useful, we would probably need to do some work on those because, you know, we don't use them. We've got no idea if they're good or not really. So this would be like an escape hatch where it wouldn't use it. So sorry, I'm just checking how it's invoked because Osvaldo pasted that the other day. Oh, it doesn't say because it overwrites its own command line, doesn't it? That's annoying. What was the question I was trying to answer there? Where does Sidekick get something from? Concurrency.
It's concurrency.
Oh yeah, so yeah, sorry, we have a Sidekick concurrency setting in GitLab.rb. That's pretty easy.
And what's the default?
I have a link to that file. 1 second. I think it's 25. Concurrency. Yes, 25. Andrew's on the move. So is everybody happy if Osvaldo goes ahead with that and like has some kind of fallback option to not use Sidekick cluster, and we give that to support somehow? We probably do want to document it, but carefully, as like this is not going to stick around for long. Like, you know, we've got GitLab 13.0 coming up, so I guess we could say like after 13.0 we can remove the if we're quick enough.
So I think I missed the point of we are not really able to pass this file to Sidekick cluster for like each queue use the exact weight defined on this file.
We can't pass the file to Sidekick cluster because that also defines the queues, and the point of Sidekick cluster is all queues. But we can pass the weights on the command line, so we can pass the file. Oh, we don't need to pass the file because they're also in allqueues.yaml. We could pass the weights on the command line. I just don't want to do that if we don't need to, because it'll be needlessly like. Ideally, I would like to just get rid of the weights. As like my first option.
We could do, Sean. I don't know if you guys can hear me now, but
yes, I can. Yeah.
Other thing we could do is we could just automatically get the weights from the latency sensitivity. So if we find that it is a problem, I mean, that just don't use the weights, but we could just say if we have latency sensitivity, then the weight is 2, otherwise it's 1. You know, and then drop the rest of it.
Yes, and I don't see those as, I think that's a good point. I don't see those as, I don't know if Andrew is trying to talk or not. I don't see those as exclusive. I see that we could remove the explicit weights that we've set and then consider reintroducing weights in some form in future based on the attributes rather than based on something that people don't really remember to set in future.
But in the short term, I like your suggestion of just providing a way out in Omnibus and move forward with that.
We can default to Sidekick cluster, then as a flag if it doesn't work well with certain self-hosted instance.
Yeah, 13.0 might be a little bit tight. I've just realized because it's in May, right? But we can talk with support with that once we've got further along this path.
Like for all we know, it won't even be a problem, and we can just drop it silently because nobody ever noticed.
Yeah, and actually maintaining this escape hatch isn't that big of a deal because it's just the file in the repo which we could just stop updating or like minimally update, and the Sidekick entry point itself, which we need to keep because Sidekick cluster uses it and because it's part of the gem. So like we're not going to remove that. So it's really just the file and the concept of a weight that we're wanting to get rid of. So we could just document for developers that you don't need to set weights anymore if we don't think they're needed, but keep the file around for a bit longer for safety.
Yeah.
Maybe it's worth looking at the dashboards that we ship with the product so that people will know if their Sidekick queues are saturated. Like obviously we've got pretty good metrics on GitLab.com, but I don't know what's the product has got, because obviously if they're saturated, then this will be, if workers are saturated, this will be a problem. But if the workers aren't saturated, then it's not a problem. But having visibility into that's kind of the problem.
I think the default Sidekick dashboard has some information about saturation, not exactly saturation, but how many jobs are in the queue that needs to be processed. So it keeps raising it's like a warn flag.
Yeah, it's not keeping up. Yeah, that'll probably
Yeah,
be
that's
the
a good
trick.
point. Yeah. Okay. Does that give you enough going forward as well, though?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for taking the time to discuss. I think that's that related point is just I'm planning to release this first on DDK using Sidekick cluster for everyone using DDK. Is anyone like against trying first to release to DDK to then go into the self-hosted instances? Because
No, I think that makes sense.
it's simpler and we are already using Sidekick cluster in a like very big scale, which is GitLab.com. And a few EE instances already use that, big EE instances already use that. So I think it's reasonable to go first with GDK, make sure everything is right, then as forward to self-hosted CE core.
That's the way that we did it with Puma, right? And it worked pretty well there because everyone on Puma's been running. Well, everyone in GDK has been running Puma for the last year or whatever. So I think it worked pretty well there, and it definitely brought up a few issues, which was pretty useful as well.
Yeah, and we used the theme background jobs, the script that's also used on the
Source
on a few
installs.
source installations. So it's interesting to start using that. But I'm planning to not change this for source installations, at least in the beginning, just CDK. So yeah, I think that was a good discussion. Thanks everyone.
Cool. So next I put Andrew's document about future work themes. We've got 6 minutes left of this call. I've got time after. I don't know if we want to do it now or if we want to push it, but like if we push it, we need to stop pushing it at some point and actually talk about it.
I'm happy to do it now. I'm not exactly firing on all cylinders today, but I'm happy to talk it through rather than keep kicking the can down the road.
Well, the other option is we can move it to top of the demo, I guess, like which is a longer meeting anyway. But like up to you. We can do both.
I'm not going to be at the demo because I'm talking at a conference then.
Okay.
So
let's do it now.
Yeah. Cool. So presuming, has everyone kind of looked through the document? And in that case, I don't think there's any need to do the Amazon read the document together yet. We can just kind of comment. I think the
one thing that I was wondering about, because I only saw this today, is like you mentioned 3 priorities. Are we going to work on those simultaneously, unlike we're doing now? Or
so Marin raised a good point, and I totally agree with him on it. And that's that we don't want to, or what he doesn't want to do, and I agree with him on this, is we don't want to have one person doing one thing, one person doing another thing, and another person, because then you get this sort of isolation and silo sort of thing, and people are kind of just working in their own worlds. And so, like, it's quite a long list of things, but I would imagine, and that's, I think, how I understand Marin wants to do it as well, is start at the top and everyone kind of works through and then get on to the next thing and obviously there'll be places where like 2 things in the one list block each other. So it makes more sense for someone to then take the next priority down. I like your rattle, by the way, Bob.
John left it here and it hasn't moved since.
So like, obviously there's, I don't know, it's kind of more like, are these the things that we want to work on? You know, there's always a lot of talk about Redis, and some of those things make a lot of sense, especially I think that S members thing, kind of every time we look at Redis, it gives me the creeps, or the slow log.
Talking to someone about that earlier, like about how we almost need denormalization, because we need like we've just shoved an array in a Redis key for when we need to get everything. And then we need the set for when we need to check membership, because the other 2 options are bad, but also having the same thing stored in 2 places, in 2 data structures is bad. So like, yeah.
I mean, this is like a kind of complicated answer, but like I would say, do we really need to always load 20,000 tags? Like there's no page that shows you 20,000 tags, right? So the places where we're doing an scan and loading all 20,000, like why are we doing that? Because we're never going to show all of them.
And I know Redis has got sorted sets, but we also need things like sorted by a filter and stuff like that. And
yeah, like branches that I know that
checking if a tag's protected.
Do we sort by multiple keys in the tags? Yeah, we do.
I think you can sort by more than one thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's frustrating because there's also things like checking if a branch is protected.
Maybe there's a solution in that.
There's also like listing branches on the create merge request page, stuff like that gets the branches from Redis. Like,
I wonder if we should be storing them in Postgres, where you could do things like this actually quite efficiently with just a table, but then obviously keeping that would be a very write heavy table. So.
I mean, like it's worth considering.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the Redis thing is definitely something we need to address. Right now, it looks like quite a small project, but I'm sure the Sidekick thing looked like quite a small project when you started it, and then it just sort of ballooned, as things tend to do. I'm happy with that as the top priority because I'm not too worried about Sidekick. Like, obviously, it does show up a bit in the capacity planning dashboards, but basically, it's seems okay.
Yeah, let's see what happens when the mirrors go away.
Yeah, the mirrors.
Yeah, and Sidekick cache seems fine, and also it's a cache. Like, we shouldn't be spending too much time. But Sidekick persistent does seem a bit of a source of issues, especially with the sessions thing you mentioned. The one thing I wanted to ask was like, and I don't really know how to frame this in terms of project because I think the way it's split up in terms of projects is good right now, but I would like us to spend some more time working on internal tooling. And I don't really know how to fit that into a project because you've got context metadata and then you've got observability below, which I think is fine because they're related, but context metadata is an easy thing to split out of that and work on its own thing. But I do think, so like
what kind of tooling is that? Are you talking mostly about like what? Can you give me some examples?
Well, just the examples that are already in the observability section of that doc.
But
okay,
right.
Yeah, so no, I'm not talking about working on new stuff. Like in addition to like what's in the doc, I'm talking about like rearranging the doc because I want to work that stuff's more fun, basically. But also like we've got Stack Prof. We've talked about RB Spy like having by default and stuff like that. Like making those sorts of things available to people easily, like could provide some big wins, but mostly during incidents, I guess. So yeah.
So I'll just give you a bit of background. It's kind of difficult without Maren being here as well, but I didn't give any priority. There were just kind of 4 themes, and the prioritization really came from Maren. And I think he felt that was stuff that we would mostly do in between the other work. But if you feel like, we can kind of push for it a little bit more. Out of those things, particularly to me, like there's so much stuff where just having the tracing on would make a big difference.
Yeah, I think the concern I have with it as a project, like sort of putting my manager hat on and thinking, probably trying to anticipate what Maren's thinking is like, this I said that the Sidekick project ballooned and the Redis project could go up a bit, maybe like this is literally a never ending, like we could always make this better, like and because like if we enjoy working on it, we could very easily say like, oh no, we totally need to add this new thing, like
what about if it was like a certain percentage of time, like
yeah, I kind of like that, like or like we say like you work on like P1 or P2
Fridays.
things. Yeah, P1 or P2 things on the current board. If you run out of P1 or P2 things, then you can take an observability thing or take a thing from the current board. But yeah, I guess this will need to wait for Maren to get back. But I would love to spend more time working on this stuff. I think it's fun. That doesn't necessarily mean we should spend more time working on it because I think it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, of those, the other thing, it's a pity Craig's not on this call. but it, you know, because it'd be interesting to see what
Sometimes,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, it's only like 3 a.m. for him. I mean, you know, but I think there's a lot of stuff down there, like the rollout of continuous profiling, like that would be something that I would imagine he would own, and the slow log stuff. And then kind of on the other 3 priorities, I don't think there's, other than the session state Redis, I don't think there's like a lot of things on there for him. And I think that's one of the things that I'm a little bit worried about at the moment, is that there's not enough like SRE stuff on there. I don't know if you tend to agree or not.
I do a bit, but I also think that's part of the point of having him on the team, because like, you know, with the 4 of us, like we generate stuff that is done by like a backend engineer or whatever, because we know stuff that we see that comes up that we think should be worked on. And I think Craig will do the same from the SRE side. So Craig, if you're watching this, I guess.
Yeah, for instance, the sidekick cluster, like portability, needs, like, I need some help from SRE sometimes, like pinging someone to discuss or just ask questions. So I think we are going to generate like work for SRE while we work on all these things.
Yeah. I think you're totally right. Like it's a pity we can't sort of define it up ahead, but I think you're spot on with that.
Andrew, I noticed that you didn't mention enabling tracing on this document anywhere, which is very weird for you. You must be very sick.
So no, I think the main thing is I think that once we have lab kit with Elastic APM, then that kind of just is a fairly small piece of work, because we just need Elastic APM, and then that will become like a relatively small piece, but it's kind of a blocker on that, and that's down in that list.
It's also possible that there will be work out of that like, you know, maybe we need to triage some things that we've noticed from that, or like maybe we need to improve things, you know, like how things are recorded or whatever. But yeah, that's why getting it on.
Are you talking about once tracing's enabled, or?
Yes, yeah. Once tracing's enabled, then you use that to generate further things to do.
Well, you know, whenever I've turned it on, there's some bizarre things, like the meta, you know, looking at the active record, querying the, you know, the DDL of the tables like over and over and over. Like, and I get it doing it at startup, but doing it like 50 times a second. And there's a lot of stuff like that I see that kind of is interesting.
Yeah, and I think this is, I think I mentioned this ages ago when I was working at GitLab, right, when we had unstructured logs, but I was like, every time I look at these logs for something, I find something else, and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Like, you know, so the more we, and this is the point of observability, right? Like the more you let people see this stuff, the more they can figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, it sounds like the questions are from Aaron. Did anybody else have any questions on the future work themes? Great. I just had a quick question. We've got Scalability office hours tonight. I don't know if anybody was planning on joining. I probably can, but like I said before, it's not a super convenient time for me. But it would be good if somebody did, so I can if nobody else can. But maybe there should be more than one of us anyway.
Yeah, for me it's going to be hard this time, because just like last time, Agatha has class, which she will have every Monday. So like, we could switch the times around a little bit sometimes. Like I joined the last one and kind of arranged that, but it was a bit difficult. So if we could like, figure something out.
Maybe we'll look at it again when we get a new manager.
Yeah.
And also the company call's no longer there in the schedule, which changes a lot of things for scheduling meetings.
Yes, like moving that a little bit forward would work very well for me.
Wait, is there no more company call? Wait, why is it not in the schedule?
Only Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Oh.
Yeah, it's moving, and it's got like multiple time slots, so like people in APAC can actually join a call, like more than once a week. Okay, I'll try and join then. I'm going to stop recording and